There is a mystery in the way God calls a man. When heaven places its hand upon a life, the evidence is rarely found in applause, comfort, or companionship. Instead, the mark of the chosen is often seen in separation. He is misunderstood by his peers, resisted by his own family, and rejected by the very circles he once called home. This is not punishment, it is preparation. For when God sets a man apart, he first removes him from the noise of the crowd so that he may hear the whisper of eternity. The chosen man always walks a different road. While others chase acceptance, he pursues truth. While others crave the safety of numbers, he learns to trust the unseen hand of God. His loneliness is not a curse, but a signal that he is being fitted for something far greater than himself. Abraham left Ur, Joseph was betrayed into Egypt. David hid in caves. Even the Son of God himself often withdrew alone. Such is the pattern. Those destined to shape history first endure the weight of walking apart. Separation is not merely an experience of distance from others. It is the first sign of consecration. When a man is chosen by God, he finds that the rhythm of his life no longer matches the rhythm of the crowd. What others celebrate, he cannot fully enjoy. What others pursue, he feels compelled to turn from. The path that once seemed natural becomes narrow, even uncomfortable, because he now bears a mark that distinguishes him. This separation is not always voluntary. Often it is imposed. Friends drift away, opportunities dry up, doors close, and suddenly the chosen man stands apart, wondering why life has thrust him into this lonely terrain. But what feels like rejection is actually redirection. God is positioning him away from the distractions of the common so he can prepare him for the uncommon. The chosen man often struggles to explain this to others because separation is invisible to the uncalled. To the casual observer, he seems odd, too serious, too withdrawn, or too different. They may even accuse him of arrogance or stubbornness. Yet deep inside, he knows something has shifted. He can no longer be satisfied with shallow pleasures or empty pursuits. His spirit aches for something greater, something eternal, something that cannot be found in the approval of men. And so he carries this invisible burden, a tension that separates him not just physically, but spiritually. History affirms this reality. Noah was called to build an ark in a world that had never seen rain. His obedience placed him at odds with every neighbor, every cultural norm, every assumption of his generation. Abraham was called to leave everything familiar, his land, his relatives, his security, to journey toward a promise he could not yet see. Moses was set apart in Pharaoh's palace, but he could never truly belong there. He bore the invisible identity of a deliverer, one who could not settle for luxury while his people suffered. Each of these men knew the sting of separation, yet that separation was the very soil where their calling took root. For the chosen man, separation is not a punishment, but a filter. It removes the excess voices, the false dependencies, the shallow entanglements that would dilute his focus. God allows seasons of stripping away so that the chosen man may know who truly walks with him. And when everyone else fades into the background, he discovers that God alone is enough. The paradox is striking. The more alone he feels, the more closely God seems to draw near. His isolation becomes the meeting place of revelation, his solitude the school where trust is learned. Thus, separation is inevitable. It is not a phase to be avoided, but a process to be embraced. The chosen man must understand that his different path is not a sign of inferiority, but of destiny. Others may laugh at his seriousness, misunderstand his silence, or mock his standards, but heaven has written a different script for his life. To walk that script faithfully, he must accept that separation is not his enemy, it is his proof of calling. Loneliness is one of the clearest signs of a divine calling. A man who is chosen cannot expect the companionship of the multitude because his journey leads him where few are willing to tread. It is not that he despises people or that he seeks solitude for its own sake. Rather, the weight of his assignment demands a level of separation that others simply cannot endure. The chosen man walks with a sense of burden that no one else can fully understand, and as a result, he often feels the sting of being misunderstood, misrepresented, or even abandoned. What appears to be loneliness is actually evidence that he is on a path so unique that few can travel it beside him. The scriptures give countless examples of this principle. Joseph dreamed dreams that his brothers could not comprehend. Their inability to understand him turned into hostility. and eventually he was cast into a pit, sold into slavery, and left alone in a foreign land. Yet it was precisely in that loneliness that God prepared him to govern nations. David, though anointed to be king, spent years in wilderness caves, surrounded not by advisors or allies, but by outcasts and strangers. Elijah, after calling down fire from heaven, found himself alone under a broom tree, pleading for death. Even our Lord, though constantly surrounded by crowds, often withdrew by himself, bearing the crushing reality that no one could truly share the weight of his mission. Loneliness, then, is not the absence of purpose. It is the shadow cast by purpose. To the natural mind, loneliness seems like weakness, but in the spiritual realm it is strength in disguise. When the chosen man is left alone, he learns reliance on God in a way that the comfortable never will. He discovers that intimacy with heaven often requires distance from earth. He learns to listen more deeply, to pray more earnestly, and to walk more carefully because he has no earthly companion to lean upon. This solitude becomes the crucible in which his character is refined. Without the distraction of constant voices, he begins to discern the single voice that matters most. Without the cushion of human encouragement, he learns the power of divine reassurance. Loneliness also protects the chosen man. If too many people were allowed into his inner circle, they might dilute his vision, discourage his faith, or distort his priorities. God, in his wisdom, allows certain friendships to fade and certain relationships to collapse, not as punishment, but as preservation. The chosen man often looks back and realizes that those seasons of painful isolation were actually the seasons where his vision became sharpest and his faith strongest. In the end, loneliness is not a curse, but a companion. It walks alongside the chosen man to remind him that he is different, that his road is narrow, and that his calling is not like others. While the world pities him for being alone, heaven honors him for being willing to walk where few dare to go. God rarely shapes his chosen vessels in the glare of public attention. Instead, he molds them in places hidden from the eyes of men. Isolation is his workshop, obscurity his chisel. It is in the silence of aloneness that God does his most profound work on a man's heart. While the crowd clamors for recognition and noise, the chosen man is quietly pulled into seasons of obscurity where his character, faith, and endurance are forged. The world sees only the finished product, wisdom, authority, or impact, but seldom understands that such strength was birthed in the unseen furnace of solitude. Consider Moses, who spent 40 years in the wilderness tending sheep before God called him to confront Pharaoh. From the perspective of men, it looked like failure, a prince of Egypt reduced to a shepherd in obscurity. But from heaven's perspective, it was preparation. The wilderness stripped Moses of self-reliance, trained him in patience, and familiarized him with the desert terrain through which he would one day lead God's people. Likewise, David's greatest lessons were not learned in the palace, but in the fields, caring for sheep and facing lions and bears with no audience but the Lord himself. Those hidden battles became the foundation for his public victories. The chosen man must accept that obscurity is not wasted time. It is the very soil in which his roots grow deep. Without it, he would be shallow, easily toppled when storms arise. In isolation, he learns discipline, how to master his own thoughts, control his emotions, and subdue his impulses. He learns faith, how to trust God when there is no applause, no affirmation, and no visible progress. He learns humility, how to serve in silence without demanding recognition. These are lessons that cannot be taught in the noise of the crowd. They must be learned in the stillness where only God sees. In these seasons, the chosen man may wrestle with discouragement, wondering if he has been forgotten or overlooked. The temptation to compare himself with others, to measure success by visible progress, weighs heavily on him. Yet, what he cannot see is that the hidden years are producing qualities the spotlight could never give him. They are killing his pride, deepening his dependence, and sharpening his discernment. The chosen man eventually discovers that the very things he despised about isolation were actually the tools God used to equip him for lasting impact. When his time of unveiling comes, it will be obvious that he carries something deeper than charisma or talent. He carries substance forged in silence, weight born of hidden endurance. The crowd will marvel, but he will know it was the years in obscurity that made him who he is. For God shapes his instruments in isolation, away from distraction, until they are ready to echo his voice with clarity and power. The chosen man, therefore, must not despise hidden seasons, for they are the very place where heaven writes destiny upon his soul. Rejection is one of the most painful experiences a chosen man will endure. Yet it is also one of the clearest confirmations of his calling. The pattern repeats throughout history. When God sets his hand upon someone, men often turn their backs on him. This is because the chosen man walks to a rhythm the world cannot hear. His convictions disturb the complacent. His standards unsettle the compromised, and his very presence exposes what others would rather keep hidden. As a result, instead of being celebrated, he is resisted, misunderstood, and often despised. What feels like man's rejection is in fact heaven's validation, for if the world fully embraced him, it would mean his message carried no weight and his calling bore no threat. Think of Joseph again, whose brothers could not stand the dreams he shared. Their hostility was not random. It was a direct reaction to the divine favor resting on his life. David, too, though he had defeated Goliath and served faithfully, found himself pursued by Saul's jealousy and driven into exile. The prophets were mocked, beaten, and cast out because they spoke truth that cut against the grain of the times. Even Christ himself, though full of grace and truth, was rejected by his own people, despised and crucified outside the city gates. If rejection followed every man God chose, should it surprise us when it visits the lives of those set apart today? Rejection hurts because it often comes from the very people we most desire to accept us: family, friends, even fellow believers. The chosen man may find his deepest wounds are not from strangers, but from those closest to him. Yet God allows this not to destroy him, but to refine him. The sting of rejection teaches him to anchor his identity not in human approval, but in divine affirmation. It forces him to ask whose voice matters most and to live by the answer. In that way, rejection becomes a holy fire that burns away dependence on the applause of men. There is also a protective purpose in rejection. Sometimes God closes doors and severs ties because the chosen man's destiny cannot be fulfilled in certain environments. If Joseph had remained comfortable with his brothers, he never would have been positioned in Egypt to save nations. If David had remained in Saul's palace, he would have been crushed by Saul's schemes before reaching the throne. What feels like betrayal is often the hand of God removing the chosen man from settings that cannot carry his future. Rejection, then, is not always loss. It is divine redirection. In time, the chosen man sees that rejection was necessary. It pushed him closer to God, purified his motives, and preserved his destiny. The world may discard him, but heaven has marked him. The crowd may say no, but God has already said yes, and that yes outweighs every rejection. Thus, for the chosen man, rejection by men is often the loudest confirmation of acceptance by God. To be chosen is to be called into clarity, and clarity cannot be found in the noise of the crowd. The chosen man learns quickly that the voice of God is not discovered in the whirlwind of distraction, but in the still small whisper that requires stillness and separation. This is why distance becomes necessary. Distance from the endless demands of culture, distance from the compromising patterns of the masses, distance even from relationships that blur his focus. Clarity demands space, and the chosen man discovers that to see with heavenly vision, he must step away from earthly clutter. The world thrives on noise, opinions, arguments, endless chatter, but noise is the enemy of discernment. A man who is constantly surrounded by voices cannot tell which voice is divine. The chosen man, therefore, is often led into seasons of withdrawal, not because he despises people, but because he values direction more than approval. It was in solitude that Moses heard the voice from the burning bush. It was in isolation that Elijah heard the whisper on Mount Horeb. Even Christ himself retreated to lonely places to pray, modeling that intimacy with the Father required distance from the crowd. The pattern is unmistakable. Those destined to change history must first learn how to silence the noise so they can hear eternity. Clarity also demands purity. The chosen man understands that if he clings to the compromises of the many, his vision will be clouded. He cannot walk with divided loyalties and still expect to discern the will of God. Distance is not merely physical separation, it is a spiritual disentangling from anything that dulls his sensitivity. That may mean walking away from certain opportunities, setting boundaries in relationships, or refusing to participate in activities others see as harmless. To the outsider, this looks extreme, but to the chosen man, it is survival. He knows that blurred vision leads to wasted years, and wasted years are too costly for one entrusted with divine purpose. In this separation, something powerful begins to happen. The chosen man starts to see with eyes others cannot see. While the crowd chases trends, he perceives truth. While others are lost in confusion, he discerns the path ahead. He carries an inner compass that points true north when the world spins in chaos. But this clarity did not come cheaply. It was purchased by solitude, maintained by discipline, and refined by sacrifice. Ultimately, the chosen man realizes that clarity is the foundation of his calling. Without it, he would stumble blindly, swayed by the opinions of others. With it, he becomes unshakable, able to stand firm even when misunderstood. The distance he embraces is not a loss, but a gift, for it allows him to walk with a certainty that others envy but cannot imitate. The chosen man knows that hearing God clearly is worth every mile of distance from the noise, for only then can he walk faithfully in the destiny assigned to him. Strength is never forged in the comfort of crowds. It is born in the silence of standing alone. The chosen man discovers this truth through painful but necessary seasons where he is stripped of every support except God himself. When the applause fades, when friends disappear, when the safety nets are gone, he is forced to lean upon a strength not his own, and it is in that place of dependence that he becomes unshakable. The chosen man's power is not in numbers, influence, or human backing. It is in the God who sustains him when no one else remains. This is why God allows isolation. Without it, the chosen man would grow dependent on the affirmations of others. He would measure his worth by how many stand with him rather than how faithfully he stands with God. But loneliness tests him, trials sift him, solitude refines him. He learns to pray when no one else will pray with him, to believe when no one else believes, and to endure when no one else is willing to endure. Each trial strengthens his resolve until his faith is no longer fragile but firm, no longer swayed by circumstance but anchored in eternity. Biblical history confirms this principle. Jacob wrestled with God alone at Peniel and emerged with a limp, but also with a new name and a destiny. Daniel faced lions not with a crowd, but in the solitude of obedience, and it was in that solitude that God revealed his strength. Paul endured prisons, shipwrecks, and betrayal, yet it was those very experiences of standing alone that forged his resilience and boldness to proclaim truth before kings. These men became unshakable not because life was easy, but because life forced them into the arms of the one who cannot fail. The chosen man learns through such trials that real strength is not loud or boastful. It is quiet, steady, and immovable. It is the strength that endures betrayal without becoming bitter, that faces hardship without collapsing, that chooses obedience even when obedience costs everything. Such strength cannot be inherited from parents or borrowed from mentors. It must be forged personally in the fires of solitude, and once forged, it becomes a strength that others cannot explain but deeply respect. What at first feels like weakness eventually reveals itself as the greatest strength of all, total reliance on God. For when the chosen man realizes he has no other foundation, he discovers that God is more than enough. This reliance produces courage others cannot mimic, peace others cannot understand, and endurance others cannot match. By walking alone, he learns that he is never truly alone, for the God who called him walks with him. And in that fellowship, he finds a strength that no opposition can shatter. Thus, the chosen man stands firm. The storms rage, the critics speak, the crowds scatter, but he remains, not because he is extraordinary, but because solitude taught him to lean wholly upon the one who is. And that is the secret of his unshakable strength. The chosen man eventually learns that his solitude is not wasted. It is the very means by which God positions him to leave an impact that outlives his generation. Walking alone is heavy, but it carries within it a hidden purpose, the shaping of a life that will echo far beyond its own years. While others spend their days blending into the crowd, chasing approval, or seeking fleeting comfort, the chosen man walks a narrow path that sets him apart. That path may look barren to onlookers, but it is lined with eternal fruit. His isolation becomes the seedbed for influence, his sacrifices the soil for legacy. History proves this truth over and over. Abraham left his homeland alone, yet from him came nations. Joseph endured betrayal and prison, yet his lonely faithfulness saved millions in famine. Esther risked her life in solitude before the king, and her courage preserved an entire people. Paul was rejected, beaten, and often deserted, yet his letters continue to shape believers thousands of years later. Even Christ, who bore the agony of Gethsemane alone, carried the cross alone, and hung on Calvary forsaken, left the greatest impact of all, the salvation of mankind. Every generation has been shaped by men and women who walked lonely paths but produced eternal results. The chosen man may not always see the fruit of his solitude immediately. In fact, he may feel at times that his sacrifices are in vain, his tears unnoticed, his prayers unanswered. Yet heaven keeps record of every hidden act of faith. The harvest may not appear in his lifetime, but the seeds he sows in faith will sprout in future generations. His children, his community, or even people he never meets may one day walk in freedom because he was willing to endure isolation for the sake of obedience. Eternal impact also requires weight, and weight comes from walking alone. The chosen man carries authority in his words because his life has been tested in the silence of solitude. Others may speak with charm, but his words cut deeper because they are forged in the fire of trial. Others may have influence that fades with time, but his impact remains because it is rooted not in popularity, but in truth. Walking alone makes him durable, steady, and trustworthy, and it is those qualities that grant him the ability to shape generations long after his voice has gone quiet. In the end, the chosen man sees that his aloneness was never a curse, but a divine strategy. The loneliness that once felt unbearable becomes the very reason his life carried such weight. His obedience, costly as it was, echoes beyond him. While the crowd fades into history, his legacy endures, for it was built not on applause but on faithfulness. Walking alone, he discovered his true calling, to be a vessel through which eternity touches time. And though solitude marked his journey, impact marks his destiny.